Minister, the entire country was shocked at the escape from Tallaght Hospital this week by a high-profile, dangerous criminal whilst he was attending a medical appointment. And I think people were particularly struck at the vicious level of assault which was perpetrated on the prison officers who were detailed to take him to that medical appointment. Now, I and my party, and I think everybody in this House, want to condemn that attack and wish the prison officers who were subject to this assault a very speedy recovery. And indeed, we would ask that the prison service would make every resource available for their proper recovery and indeed their welfare. What has concerned public the most is that this person was a high-profile, well-known prisoner who had previously escaped from the UK prior to his imprisonment here in this jurisdiction. And we now know from reports that the Irish Prison Service had previously requested on a number of occasions when he was leaving the prison campus for medical appointments that armed escorts had been requested by the prison service of An Garda Síochána to accompany this prisoner to his medical appointments, and that they were declined. Now, I think it's fair to say that the whole issue raises a number of serious issues and questions, particularly in relation to the level of Garda resources which are available and afforded to the prison service for these types of escorts. It also raises questions in relation to the welfare of our prison staff in terms of the equipment which is available to them, for example, stab vests, pepper spray and batons, which we've heard that they've been sought to be provided by their Prison Officer Association. And there's also the wider question of the welfare of our frontline emergency workers, the Gardaí, the prison officers, our nurses, our doctors working in emergency departments, and indeed our fire service. Now, since all of this incident happened earlier in the week, we know that there is a Garda investigation ongoing. We also know that the prison service are doing a Garda investigation. And bearing in mind this individual's past record of escaping, the public failed to understand the statement yesterday, Minister, by the Taoiseach, that this had nothing to do with cutbacks to the resources of An Garda Síochána, or indeed the lack of resources to An Garda Síochána to provide this detail to the prison service. So, against the backdrop of that amazing statement by the Taoiseach yesterday, given that the two reports are a work in progress, and we know that the Taoiseach isn't authoring those reports or indeed carrying out the investigations himself, can I ask you, Minister, do you agree with the statement of the Taoiseach yesterday that this issue had nothing to do with the lack of Garda resources? And can I ask you, are you aware, or indeed is the government aware, arising from this event, on how many previous occasions have the prison service had requests for armed escorts declined by An Garda Síochána, either due to a lack of resources or for any other stated reason? Thank you.
Deputy Minister. Thank you, Liascon Corla. And can I join first of all with Deputy Collins in very much regretting the incident that occurred yesterday, particularly from the perspective of the prison officers who were involved, the professional prison officers in this state who do such a great job and who do it very often under very considerable pressure, not least in relation to an incident such as this, even though it may well be, relatively speaking, an unusual and an isolated incident of the nature that occurred yesterday. I agree with Deputy Collins. The welfare of prison officers and the welfare indeed of personnel who work across the board, whether in the health services or in the prison service, the Garda Síochána, right across the board, their welfare of course is paramount, and I join with him, and I'm sure all members of the House will join in wishing the prison officers involved a speedy recovery. In relation to the actual incident itself, the Deputy will appreciate and will know that this is and this remains an operational matter for An Garda Síochána in this jurisdiction in the first instance, and for the Police Service of Northern Ireland, where I understand the individual currently is and is in their custody. And in those circumstances, it wouldn't be appropriate or indeed arguably even possible for me to comment on any of the individual aspects of the particular incident to which he refers. I'll come to the question of resources in a moment. The Guards and PSNI have to be allowed to get on with the work that they do so well and so professionally on our behalf. and it isn't simply possible or indeed appropriate for us to pick over individual aspects of the professional work that they do. On the question of resources, of course, which does have a wider, I agree with him, a wider political dimension to it, I agree with the Taoiseach in the sense that there is no evidence and there's no basis for the assumption that the Deputy appears to have arrived at, that this matter, this particular incident to which he referred, occurred because of any lack of resources. There is no evidence at all to support such a proposition on his part. The Deputy will be aware on the broader question of resources that 100 new recruits entered training at the Garda College in Templemore in September last, 2014, which I remind him is the first intake of Garda recruits since the moratorium put in place by the government of which he was a supporter in 2009. This was followed by an intake of a further 100 new recruits in December and another 100 last week. This has brought the number of recruits in the Garda College to 300 and is a measure of this government's commitment to the Garda Síochána. The first intake of recruits will attest as members of An Garda Síochána in May of this year and will be assigned to Garda stations by the Garda Commissioner across the country. On the question of equipment, the question generally in relation to vehicles is often raised in the context of Garda Síochána. The Deputy will be aware and the House should know that the Government recently secured an additional €10 million for investment in the Garda fleet, €7 million of which was made available in 2014, with the remaining €3 million being provided in 2015. So on the question of resources, we are resourcing our Garda Síochána. We are ensuring that the Garda Síochána and indeed the prison services right across the board are properly resourced. As possible, the Minister for Justice is able to find, and the Government is able to find, increasing resources to fill the gap, in fact the enormous gap, that was left by the actions of his government.
Thank you. Deputy Niall Collins for a supplementary question.
Thanks. Minister, I find your response amazing, quite frankly. You say that there is no evidence that there was an issue with Garda resources. Why was it the case that when the prison service previously requested armed escorts for this individual, that they were declined? Surely, if the agency of state which is charged with keeping criminals locked up in the prison service and dealing with issues of such a nature, when they request this, that it should be taken on board. So it's clearly the case that there is an issue in relation to resources. And, Minister, despite all the political rhetoric, it was your government that continued the moratorium on recruitment right throughout 2011, 2012, 2013 and 2014. And whilst I would remind you, at the same time, you continue to recruit into the Defence Forces. And the public out there are aghast at this situation where the Gardaí numbers were allowed to dwindle. You didn't bring anybody in over those intervening years, and you say you were doing something about it. You haven't answered the question as to how many other instances there were where requests were made of An Garda Síochána to provide armed escorts. You haven't answered that question. And your comments in relation to the welfare, your comments in relation to your concerns of welfare for frontline emergency workers really ring hollow, because you have to look at how ye acted in government in relation to that. This party offered legislation which would protect frontline workers. The Assaults on Emergency Workers Bill of 2012, which was introduced by my colleague Derek O'Leary, sought to place a minimum mandatory extra tariff on anybody who committed an assault on a nurse, a Garda, a prison officer, a firefighter, people who are out there day in and day out protecting people, protecting communities, protecting people's properties. So you talk about a concern for the welfare of our frontline workers, but your actions haven't followed through in relation to that. Now, in relation, and the track record proves it. It is a fact that your actions haven't lived up to your concerned welfare which you've expressed in here today. So can I ask you to follow through on that? Will you provide what the Prison Officers Association have been asking, proper stab vests, pepper spray and batons and the other equipment which the frontline prison office staff want to protect themselves in their day-to-day duties?
Minister?
The Minister for Justice, Deputy Fitzgerald, deals with this question and has dealt very carefully and very well with this issue, particularly with regard to the resourcing of a Garda Síochána and indeed the prison service. And, you know, it is extraordinary for the Deputy to talk about the moratorium having been continued by this government, a moratorium which his government put in place. I find it difficult sometimes to understand the position of Fianna Fáil. Do they agree with what this government has done in the context of the recovering economy and the attempt to put new resources and the successful putting in place of new resources, or is it something that they just want to play political football with? Because the Deputy himself talks about rhetoric and deputies on this side of the House dealing in rhetoric. He's made a good fist at that himself this morning, and he really shouldn't, Lascan Corla, draw into question the sincerity of my remarks in relation to the welfare of individuals when I would not question his sincerity in that regard. Now, the question of resources. Now, the question of resources. The Deputy did ask me in relation to particular requests. I don't frankly know, Lascan Corla, in relation to how many requests, or the extent or number of requests in relation to armed escorts. And he has asked me a specific question in that regard. I will check that for him and revert to him as best we can. But the Deputy has no evidence. And the Deputy has not placed any evidence on the record of this House, despite his bleatings, that any particular incident, occurred, yesterday's one or any other one, because of a lack of resources. He has not, in fact, done that, because that evidence is not there. And he wants to make a political point out of a very regrettable and very dangerous incident, which he shouldn't attempt to do. The Minister for Justice is dealing with this question. She has won new resources, considerable new resources for Garda Síochána right across the board. For example, I didn't get an opportunity to mention earlier an additional investment of €7 million enabling the Guards to purchase 370 new vehicles towards the end of last year. The members opposite don't want to hear this information because it doesn't suit the narrative that they're actually trying to convey. This government is dealing with a recovering economy, and this government will put resources in place as they are required right across the board for all our public services, and we're doing that successfully, and that's the problem for the party opposite.
Thank you, Minister.